So there's a lot of reports in the press today about the US Trump administration putting tighter controls on semiconductor exports, and this mainly means semiconductor exports on chips from the company NVidia, as they're the ones that make the most cutting edge GPUs. And one of the news articles talks about John Hawley, and he wants to pass a bill called the Decoupling America's Artificial Intelligence Capabilities from China Act, which would basically cut off US-China cooperation on AI altogether. And here's a short video of Republican John Moodliner talking about the same thing. They're basically suggesting that all cooperation between China and the USA is completely severed, and that we should impose much more stricter chip export controls on NVIDIA chips.
I think we need to continue to strengthen our export controls. We need to close loopholes that allow technology to be exported to other countries that eventually get it to China. We need to make sure we're tracking outbound investment so it's not benefiting the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. And we need to make sure we discontinue these university partnerships between U.S. and Chinese universities where they are gaining our technology and using it for military applications.
Okay, so these additional export controls were being talked about in the Biden administration, so this is just really a continuation, but it's come out in the media today. But just before Biden left the presidency, he put in basically an act that basically split the world into three tiers. There's tier one, which are the countries that can have full access to American chip technology. That includes Britain, some European countries, Japan. Then there's tier two, which have to apply for licenses and have the numbers of semiconductors they can buy limited. And then there's tier three, which includes countries like North Korea, Iran, China and Russia, which are forbidden from having any access to those chips. Now, the Trump administration are talking about making this even stricter, but this is really not good. You know, it's dividing the world. You know, that there's going to be arguments. There's a lot of countries who thought they would be tier one who've been tier two. You know, a lot of countries who thought they were very close allies to the US who are not going to be able to get the chips that they want to. Now, in my opinion, this is really a stupid exercise, because actually it's damaging the revenue of US companies. So if you look at NVidia still get a large amount of their revenue from the Chinese market, and I think that's something upward now of 70% of Chinese companies who are using these GPUs are starting to turn to domestic companies to provide these GPUs, predominantly Huawei, because Huawei have their Ascend CPUs, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the reason why they're turning to those domestic companies is one, under you know, a push from the Chinese government, but it's because that if they start building their infrastructure on NVIDIA GPUs, and then like now the sanctions are tightened and they can no longer get more NVIDIA GPUs or as many as they wanted. There's always ways of getting them, and again, I'll come on to that a little later in the video. But it means that they will need to then, you know, swap and change, whereas if they build their infrastructure on Chinese GPUs, although right at the moment they're not quite as powerful as the NVIDIA ones, they will have no problem having to swap and change things around. But this cuts into NVIDIA's revenue, and ultimately it means NVIDIA will not have as much revenue to spend on R&D. What it's also doing, it's pushing other developing countries towards China, and as far as I'm aware, there are 57 developing nations who are currently negotiating AI partnerships with China to bypass US quotas. So it's really giving China a really good sort of incentive to continue pushing their digital Silk Road investments. And I think from these sanctions that America are putting, there's going to be basically three things that come out of this. So the first is that, as I mentioned previously, Huawei are developing the Ascend. So they have the 910B, which is a powerful GPU. It's not quite as powerful as the NVIDIA chips, but I think it's 60 to 70% as powerful. And they also have the 910C, which they've recently released, but that's said they will ramp up production in the first quarter of this year. So, as I said earlier, 73% of Chinese tech firms now prioritize domestic GPUs over NVIDIA and imported GPUs using Huawei chips. And in the last quarter of 2024, Huawei saw a 300% increase in use of those chips. Now, China don't actually have a problem with designing semiconductors, and I think that China can design semiconductors probably at a similar level to NVIDIA. They have a lot of smart people in China. They graduate kind of 7 times more STEM graduates each year than America do, and they have a lot of young Chinese engineers who want to prove themselves, and this is why we've just got Deepseek show it's you know how smart these guys are. The problem is in manufacturing, and most notably lithography. However, Huawei have just finished building, or they're in the late stages of completion of their new Shanghai R&D center. Now, this is rumored to have around 30,000 engineers will ultimately be working there, and I believe one of the main sort of issues that this R&D center will solve, will be put to work on solving initially, is this lack of lithography at an EUV level. And interestingly, a university in Harbin in the north of China have recently announced a breakthrough in EUV light sources. So, you know, when these universities working with this new R&D center in Shanghai, I really don't believe myself that it's going to be many years before China solve this lithography problem. And the second thing I think that these sanctions will do is they will further fuel the grey market. Now, wherever there's money to be made, there'll be a grey market emerge, and I think that China, although it will cost them more, it will actually, they can still get NVIDIA GPUs if they need to. There's a huge amount of grey market. There's various videos floating around on Chinese social media sites showing people getting shipments of hundreds of these NVidia GPUs. And I think that, unless the US cut off exports altogether, there will always be a grey market. And I think the third option that Chinese companies have, and I only think these are options, like the grey market is an option, while domestic processors and domestic chips are catching up, and I think they will catch up. I predict they will catch up within a period of less than 10 years, which seems a long time, but it's not that long really. But the third option they have is using computing worldwide data centers. So they can rent 5,000 top of the line NVIDIA GPUs in a data center somewhere in the world. They can build a model, train the model, and then they can run that model from an inference point of view on Huawei Ascend CPUs, because as far as I understand, you don't need such powerful GPUs for inference as you do for training. So I think really these sanctions that America keep doubling down on, this is a thing that America do. I mean, we had Gina Raimondo say at her final days that putting these sanctions on China is a bit of a fool's errand. And I agree. I think it is. I think the US would be much better, just cooperating with China. It'll be a great shame if academia cooperation between China and the USA stops because of a few politicians who really don't understand the bigger picture. And you look at the CEOs of all these tech companies, they're pushing the government not to impose more sanctions and even roll back existing sanctions, because it's not doing anybody any good. The US basically want to adopt a closed model for artificial intelligence where they can charge people lots of money and a small amount of people can make a huge amount of money out of it. The big shareholders of OpenAI, the big shareholders of Microsoft, the big shareholders of Google. Whereas China have a very different approach. They want to develop open source models. You see that some of the biggest models in China are open source. Alibaba are open source in their models. Deepseek, other Chinese companies are open source in their models. Whereas you see a majority of American companies want their models closed source. The only company I'm aware of that are open sourcing in the US are Meta. But right now, Meta's Llama models are some distance behind the leading models. Meta have said they're going to invest a huge amount of money and they will have some of the best models, but let's wait and see. Anyway, I'll be interested to know what you think. Give me your comments and thoughts down below, but I'll see you in the next one. And as always, for now, take care.